If you have an LG dryer that is not heating at all, I want to show you how to take it apart and test some of the various components to see what could be bad on this style dryer. There are a few error codes like TE3 or HS that could suggest what part is bad, and we're going to deal with those when we take this dryer apart. But before we take it apart first, it's always worthwhile to check the electrical connections first going to the dryer. Use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the rear plate where the electrical cord is installed. Once you have opened this up, you want to use a multimeter, and if you don't have one, make sure to check the link in my description for the exact one I'm using in this video and throughout it. Now take your multimeter and set it to AC voltage. From here, you want to use the red and black leads of the multimeter to test the middle and left terminal screws, then the middle and right terminal screws, and then finally the left and right screws. You should get around 120 volts AC between the middle and left and then middle and right screws. You then should get 240 volts between the left and right screws. If you see an odd value that's significantly outside of this, or 0, there is an issue with the dryer's electric going into the system, and you may have even gotten a code for this such as NP or PF on this type of dryer indicating that there is an issue. To troubleshoot this, let's first visually inspect the terminal block and the screws, and the power cord that goes into the terminal block here. Does anything look damaged or burnt or singed? Next, look at the power cord where it connects to the outlet. Does anything look burnt or damaged? If you see anything that's been burnt or damaged on either the block, the screws, the wires, or the cord, replace whatever is damaged all the way through. Next, if none of these things look damaged, cycle the breaker on the breaker box that deals with your dryer, all the way off, then all the way on. It's possible that the dryer mistakenly tripped the breaker, causing the heating leg or L2 of the electrical wire not to have a connection. Now, if you still can't get electric, time to call an electrician. You have a outlet problem or something else in the system that's a big mess, and that's actually what problem we had with this dryer in the first place. If the voltage is fine, let's go ahead and take the dryer apart. Let's first remove the 3 screws at the bottom of this metal bracket, and once you have these 3 screws removed, you can remove the top panel to the dryer, exposing the drum and the housing. Depending on your LG dryer, there could be 2 screws on the panel behind this metal bracket that you're going to need to remove as shown. However, on this model, it has a steam dry system with this drawer here, which is removable by taking out the water tray, then pulling up on a hidden tab at the bottom of the plastic housing, which allows us to remove this tray. Now you want to unplug all the wires that go from the control interface to the main electronic board at the back of the dryer. On this specific model, there are 3 wire harnesses that need disconnected, 2 on the left side of the trunk and then 1 on the right. Next, there are 2 Phillips head screws that need removed from this model in the steam tray on the very front of it. Most models again would have had those 2 screws behind the interface panel on the metal bracket, keep it in place, but when these 2 screws are removed from the panel, you can pull up on the top of the dryer of the interface and roll it away from the dryer bulkhead housing. On models that do not have this style plastic tray, I've found that you may have to pull extra hard to dislodge the interface from the metal bulkhead, as there are like little retention tabs that hold it on. Once it is off, fully move it to the side away from the dryer. There are 2 wire harnesses that the interface was hiding. One is for the door switch, which is the white one, and then the other is for a light, which is this red harness here. And you want to unplug these and move the wires away from the bulkhead, typically to the rear of the dryer. On this model LG dryer, there are 2 screws on the top of the door that need removed, and then you're going to see another 4 screws inside the door, 1 in each corner that need removed. But you can see on this style dryer, this exact use dryer that I got, some of the screws are missing. So your model could vary slightly a little bit, but remove all 6 screws, and then to remove the door cover, you're going to slide the top of the door housing forward and then lift up to take it off the metal feet that are at the bottom of the dryer. Now we want to remove the metal plate that held the interface in place. There are 4 screws on this specific model. There are 2 on each side of the top of the dryer just behind the panel, and then there's 1 on the front left and 1 on the front right that need removed. But on this model, due to the steam portion, there are 2 crossbars that hold the circuit board in place that have an extra single screw that need removed as well. Once you remove all these screws, take the plate off of the dryer. Since this is such a large LG dryer, we have to remove the steam injection system as well as the control board before we can easily take the drum out. There are 2 screws holding the control board in place, and then a ground screw going from the steam system to the crossbar, and then 2 screws on the back of each crossbar holding them in place at the very back of the dryer. And I'm going through slowly removing each of these pieces and then detaching a rubber hose going to the steam system from the dryer itself. And then I want to remove the steam system entirely itself. That system is held in on the left side of the dryer housing with some plastic arms that slot into the metal. Slide these towards the rear of the unit, and the whole housing can be taken out in one easy piece. This was quite a bit of screws, but really easy actually to do. Now, at this point, you could unplug all the wires and hoses to totally remove the systems and put them to the side, but professionals are just going to move them away from the work that's being done on the dryer. So I've just flipped them out to the outside of the dryer away from view, but they're still actually attached with the wires. There's plenty of strain relief. Now there are 4 Phillips head screws holding the bulkhead in place, one on each corner of the bulkhead, and then there's 1 screw at the very bottom of the blower housing that needs removed to take the entire bulkhead off. Once you have these 5 screws removed, now you want to unclip the moisture sensor in the lower right corner of the dryer. I found out this was already unplugged before I even touched the dryer, and this was actually, I think, one of the problems I had with this dryer that wasn't allowing the dryer to run in the first place. Make sure that moisture sensor is unclipped, and then you're going to deal with the 5 screws. Once you have all the screws out, you can lift up on the dryer bulkhead to dislodge it from these little tabs holding it in place. Then you're going to remove it from the drum. This will cause the drum to fall on the blower housing. Once you have that done, you're going to get down on your knees and insert your hands into the area between the drum and blower housing and feel around for the idler pulley. To remove the belt from the pulley system here, you're going to push the idler pulley and then remove the belt from the motor spindle, and then the entire belt should release, allowing you to take the drum out. Once you have the belt off of the motor mount and idler system, you can use the belt to lift up on the drum and then move the drum out of the dryer. You can now inspect the entire drum of the dryer, anything for visually damaged or anything that's off. One quick area of concern on this particular dryer is that there's a little bit of lint inside the unit. Now that it's disassembled, it's the perfect time to clean it out with a little vacuum cleaner. Now let's start testing the heat components on the dryer and the blower housing. Let's start first with the element. I typically use needle nose pliers to remove at least 2 of the 3 wires that are on the element to isolate it. Then you want to turn your multimeter on ohms and test each of the 3 wire combinations. Let's start with red to blue, which blue's in the middle, and it should be around 20 ohms for that connection. Next, blue to yellow, which yellow's at the bottom, should be 40 ohms. Then finally, red at the top and yellow at the bottom should be 20 ohms. If you get a reading much outside of these different values, the heating element is probably going bad and the entire housing is going to need to be replaced all at once. Another thing to consider that I did not get the chance to film on this particular LG dryer is when you test with one lead on the collared wires, use the other lead to tap it onto the heating canister and see if you get a signal. If you get a signal between the terminal and the heater can, that means the heater can is grounded and the element on the inside is broken, and it makes a connection grounding the can out, which causes it to heat but not very well, and you absolutely want to replace this immediately because it's dangerous. You should get an OL signal from the multimeter when you tap the spade terminals with one lead to the heater can assembly itself, and it's this way on any dryer you're ever going to find. Moving on then to the first sensor, the thermal cutoff sensor, remove one wire with the needle nose pliers. Then use your multimeter on ohms resistance or continuity and press the leads on each of the sensor's terminals. You should get a value of nearly 0.00, which means it's good. If your multimeter reads OL, which means open line, the sensor's bad and it needs replaced because you can't get any electricity through that sensor, which means the electricity that should be heating the dryer is not going through that sensor either because it's damaged. Some of these types of sensors on LG dryers are resettable with a visual button, so if there is a button on it, you can press that and reset this fuse and try again, but most models do not have that button. Once you have that sensor tested, finally remove the red wire from the thermostat in the rear and proceed with the last test using the same values that we just tried. If you test and get an OL signal on the thermostat, it's bad. But if you get a signal reading about 0.00 on any of the terminal options, this particular thermostat should be good and does not need replaced. Once you have these sensors tested, Another thing to inspect on the housing is the wires that go to each of the spade connectors. If you see heat damage, burn marks, scorch marks, or anything that could indicate that they've been hot and damaged, you want to replace them. You'd want to cut the wire back until there's no burnt black damage and splice in a new wire harness connection. And I do have those available. They make a splice connector that works really, really well for any model out there. Next, we want to test the thermistor and blower housing fuse real quick. The thermistor is responsible for the TE3 error code, and if you get that, chances are this thermistor is bad. The thermistor is this small metal rod inserted into the blower housing. You want to unclip the wire harness, then use the leads of your multimeter to test for ohms resistance. I always test from the wires going into the harness rather than stick the leads in the harness because it's a little bit easier with the way that the leads hold onto the metal that actually get a reading. Here's the thermistor chart for LG dryer thermistors. You should get a value of 11K or 11,000 ohms based on this chart, based on the temperature of where we're at. If the value is off by much more than, say, 5 or 10%, then you want to unscrew this thermistor with a Phillips head screwdriver and then replace it. I do have a link for the thermistor in the description if this is what ends up being bad and you need to replace it. Once you have the thermistor plugged back in, you can do the same exact test for the blower housing fuse. Use ohms resistance and test the harness. But it's self-explanatory because it runs like the other thermal fuse. If you get an OL signal, the fuse is bad and needs replaced. If you get a value nearing 0.00, so you get a reading, it should be good and you do not need to replace it. Now going back to the heating canister, if you do need to replace it, you need to unscrew the 2 screws from the front of the mounting bracket that hold it on. You then will lift up and out once you remove the wires from the small retainers at the bottom of the dryer to remove the entire assembly. Heating canister only comes in one piece, and I have a link for it in the description. And again, as far as I'm aware, they don't sell the heating element by itself, just typically with the sensors. Now, if you have to reinstall the canister, note that there's a metal slot at the very back of the bulkhead that you need to slot it into when you install the canister. There's also a small tab on the front where the mounting bracket is, and the canister will fit into these 2 slots as you pivot it in. Once you have that done, you're going to put the 2 screws in and then make sure all 3 wires are reinserted correctly on the element. It goes red at the top, blue, and then yellow, and then make sure your other red wire is attached at the very back where you have the thermostat. Since we have the dryer part, one other final thing to check is the moisture sensor. This could be that HE or HS error code we talked about at the very beginning of the video. The moisture sensor is on the rear of the front bulkhead, which we've taken out of the unit already, where the air filter is. You have 2 metal strips that are attached to the wire harness we unplugged earlier in the video. To test the moisture sensor, you want to set your multimeter to ohms resistance and insert the leads into the plug. You then can use a damp cloth or a wet finger to place it on the 2 metal strips of the moisture sensor. And if your multimeter shows a resistance value, the moisture sensor is working, and you can move your finger along the moisture sensor to test for resistance over the entire moisture sensor. If you only get a reading in certain places on the strips when you slide your finger or cloth, the sensor bars either need cleaned with a wet rag and a cleaning solution or replaced entirely. But if you get a reading throughout the entire moisture bar, it works. That is not the culprit of the non-heating issue. Now that we've tested all the basic, easy components in the LG dryer, let's go ahead and put it back together after all of our work. First, you want to take the dryer drum and put it back into the dryer with the belt attached. Now, a lot of times the drum will not be slotted properly, and you need to move the drum to make sure it slots in between the bulkhead and the roller wheel assemblies. Make sure the drum can turn smoothly before you do anything else. Next, you're going to put your arms back in between the blower housing and thread the belt onto the idler pulley. This is how I typically put it on, by threading it on the motor pulley first and then moving onto the idler pulley to give the tension to the belt. You'll have to feel around to do most of this, sadly, and it's not easy. If the idler is put on correctly, you should be able to turn the drum on the rollers in the bulkhead, resulting in the belt spinning the motor, idler, and blower fan. If all of these things rotate without any major noise or issues, you know that you've installed the drum properly and you can go on to the next set of installation steps. You also want to make sure the belt is installed to the same marker on the top of the drum. You can see its imprint on the dryer at the top. Now you want to put the front bulkhead on. There are 4 small fingers that rest on the dryer frame that you need to slot the bulkhead onto. You also need to make sure that the front of the drum rests in between the rollers and bulkhead frame just like the rear. I usually find the easiest way to get it into place is slowly rolling the drum around while I gently push the bulkhead towards the drum. Make sure that you also reattach and reconnect the moisture sensor in the lower right corner, unlike the person that owned this dryer before we got it at our used appliance store. You're then going to go ahead and reattach the 4 Phillips head screws onto the bulkhead to secure it to the dryer frame. And again, on this unique dryer, I'm going to go ahead and put the crossbars back into place and then loosely screw the 2 screws back into the rear of the crossbars, which you can't see too well. Once that's done, the top of the metal bracket that holds the interface is going to go on. There are 2 small metal slots that keep this bracket and slot it into place, and you can't see these very well on camera. Once that's in place, you have 4 screws to reinsert, and then I have to reinsert the crossbars back into the metal bracket. Now I have to put the steam system housing back into place. I mainly have to focus on slotting the housing into place on the sidewall of the dryer and then push it forward to lock into place. Once I have that done, I can route the control board back into place and then insert the steam hose from the dryer into the steam housing system. I screwed up and had to flip the control board around a few times to make sure it gets in the right position, but everything fits into place, and I used the earlier parts of my video just to make sure I referenced the proper positions and matched them up. Make sure you reinsert all the screws as needed and that the grounding strap is the correct slot. Once you have all that done, make sure the wire harnesses go to the front of the dryer and are routed through the metal bracket properly. The light switch harness needs to be reattached at this point, and then now you're going to take that giant front cover of the door with the dryer and reattach it. It rests on 2 huge fingers at the very bottom of the dryer and it slots in. Then you're going to pivot and rock the entire assembly towards the dryer. Make sure before you start screwing things in that the door switch harness is reinstalled, and then you're going to slowly reinsert the 6 Phillips head screws that hold the entire front of the door onto the bulkhead, 2 at the top of the cover into the bracket, and then 4 around the door if they fit, which one of these was so damaged from the previous owner I couldn't reinsert it. We are almost done putting the unit back together. Now you will carefully reseat the dryer interface into the metal bracket, press it in, and then you're going to route the 3 wire harnesses through the bracket to make sure that they attach to the harnesses correctly at the rear of the dryer. In the case of this dryer, I had to move the control board forward just a little bit so there was enough room for the wires to attach, and that was a mistake that I made during the video. Once you have it at the right depth, reattach these 3 wire harnesses. At this point, reinsert the screws into the control interface to make sure it's fully attached to the metal bracket. Again, because of the steam settings, the 2 on the left are where I needed attached to this dryer, but in most cases, they're behind the bracket on the left and right side. At this point, you can test the dryer to make sure it works, even though the steam tray is not inserted and the top of the dryer is not on either. This way, you can do some initial testing to verify that the heat works. And in fact, this dryer has been put back correctly. Everything, as you can see, is fully working. If you still don't have heat on the dryer and you've checked every single sensor and the electricity, the 2 final suggestions I would make would be to check the vent for lint obstructions as well as outgoing power from the main board to the heating element. But at that point, I would suggest calling a technician, and I hope that this video has helped you get your dryer back working. Now, if you find a bad part, make sure to check the link to the shop on the screen right now, and it will help the channel out. If you have any questions, leave a comment and make sure to subscribe for the other LG dryer videos that I will have coming out. Have a great day.